Welcome into the newest edition of the Checkerboard Chat. Having a second issue for you guys this week as we dive into some of the smaller sports on Tennessee's campus. We'll look at the Tennessee baseball team, softball team, soccer and volleyball team, all in action this spring. We will start in this first segment with the Tennessee baseball team. I'm Ryan Shumpert, joined here by one of our Tennessee baseball beat writers and our assistant sports editor at the Daily Beacon, Josh Lane. Josh, what did you see from Tennessee in their second week of the season? They pick up two midweek wins over a bad Arkansas Pine Bluff team before splitting a 4-game series with Indiana State.
Yeah, kind of an up and down week for Tennessee baseball. Like you said, Pine Bluff, not a good team at all. So Tennessee was able to put up 35 runs in 2 games on them. I mean, just a total offensive domination of that. But then, they faced a little bit better team against Indiana State this weekend, and they split the series. So some offensive, a couple of guys, a couple of big contributors from last year have not been off to the best start. They've not had the most timely starting pitching on a couple of occasions, but up and down week for Tennessee baseball, really.
Yeah, I agree. What stood out to me, and we'll talk about in a second a little bit, is the hitting not quite, it wasn't horrible, but not quite on par with what you'd expect. But the other thing that stood out to me was just Sean Hunley. I mean, we've known for the past 3 years that he's a good pitcher, a reliable pitcher, but he's just been really, really good this year, and he was huge for Tennessee this weekend. He comes in and throws with a 1-run lead in the 6th inning against Indiana State in Game 1, throws 4 scoreless innings, doesn't give up a hit. And then Sunday, he gets thrown into a really bad situation with Tennessee's starting pitcher, Jackson Leaf, going down on the 3rd batter. So he has to come in the game in the 1st inning. But again, not rattled, has a really good performance, only gives up 2 hits. Now, he did give up 2 runs as they came back-to-back an infield hit, and then the one mistake he made, giving up a 2-run homer. But 5 innings, 5 2/3 innings, 6 strikeouts, only allowed, I believe, 3 base runners. He's just been remarkably efficient, and they really can throw him into any different situation, and he's going to be composed and be able to get outs for Tennessee.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we might hit on it a little bit later, but with Jackson Leaf out, he might be a guy that Tennessee turns to, to really start some games, to pick up some innings. I know he's been primarily out of the bullpen, but with just how dominant he's been to start this early season, Sean Hunley definitely been a bright spot for Tennessee. And I think, Vitello might look to him to pick up some starts here if for however long Jackson Leaf might be gone.
And another, takeaway I had, this wasn't necessarily Tennessee specific, but across the country, you're seeing a lot more of upsets and things like this happen where Indiana State splits 4 games with Tennessee, with the seniors being able to come back. You're seeing these mid-major teams be better than they really ever have. And despite the fact that Tennessee split 4 games against Indiana State, they didn't drop. And the polls this week stayed at 18 in D1 baseball's poll. A ton of teams either lost series to mid-majors or lost a game or split series. So it's going to be competitive. You're going to have to bring it every single week. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about Georgia State here at the end, but they were predicted to finish last in their division in the Sun Belt, and they've started the year by splitting a series against the West Virginia team ranked in the top 25, and then they got 1 win out of 4 at Vanderbilt this weekend, and were very competitive in 2 of those games. So it's going to be a challenge. You're going to have consistency, and that can sometimes be difficult in a sport that you're playing 4 or 5 games a week to bring it every day. But certainly that's something that'll be interesting to watch going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tony Vitello has said it all year with the shortened MLB draft, the extra year of eligibility, seniors, more players are coming back, and it's really boosting up these college rosters, really making some good teams. And I think, this might have been a bit of an eye-opening weekend for Tennessee against Indiana State. Maybe they hadn't they've heard that, but they hadn't fully realized what that looks like, what, a team with a bunch of better players looks like. And so, I think going into this next week against Dayton, but particularly against Georgia State, I think we might see some better performance here now that they've, finally realized just and seen it in action, just how good college baseball is this year, how competitive it can be, and that an upset can happen at any time.
Yeah, you talked about it a second ago. The hitting not off to quite as hot as a start, just scored 16 runs in over 4 games this weekend. Hasn't been awful, just hasn't been quite up to expectations. Any concern there for you long term? Is that something that is just kind of a blip on the radar right now, or a larger issue for Tennessee?
Right now I'm not too concerned about it. There's plenty of time for them to turn it around, and it is a start to the season, and it's been such a weird, crazy off season. But it is a little concerning that some of your biggest contributors from last year. I'm looking at Max Ferguson here, Luke Lipschitz, Evan Russell, who has been injured, but he's batting under 200 right now. So Connor Pavoloni has 1 RBI right now. So a couple of those guys that were big pieces of their success last year, that have really struggled out of the gate. And like I said, I'm not too worried about it long term. Those guys are, they've had racked up the awards. They're such good players. There's definitely time for them to turn around, and I think they will be able to. But it has been a little bit of an issue for Tennessee this weekend. But I think there's definitely time. They're definitely able to turn it around.
Yeah, I would say it's a bit of a question mark at this point. I don't really think it's a huge concern just because, like you said, it's the experienced guys that are struggling. You looked at the guys kind of before the year, the younger guys, you're like, if these guys can make steps, Tennessee could be really good. And those guys have made those jumps. Jordan Beck sitting 313, has 3 homers and 12 RBIs. Drew Gilbert sitting 303. Both those guys have made really good jumps from their freshman to sophomore seasons. And then it's kind of the juniors and the seniors that are struggling. And especially the juniors that were kind of supposed to be the stars of Tennessee's team, Connor Pavoloni, Jake Rucker, Max Ferguson. And you saw Vitello, he talked about it Sunday after the game, that you sometimes see juniors, they have a lot of pressure on them. This is the first year they can be drafted since high school. You see those guys sometimes put a little too much pressure on themselves, press a little bit early in the season and struggle. He didn't seem to be overly worried about it. I don't think it should be something that will be a massive long-term concern for Tennessee. You even saw Jake Rucker started to hit better this weekend. He hit 313 through those 4 games. So you're already seeing him start to kind of come back to form. And I thought Connor Pavoloni had some better at bats. Only had one hit and a sac fly on Sunday, but I thought he looked a lot more comfortable at the plate than he has. We talked about it a second ago, but Jackson Leaf goes down with what looked to be a left hamstring injury in Tennessee's Sunday win over Indiana State. Just how big of a loss is that, and what does Tennessee do? Where does Tennessee turn now without him?
Yeah, I mean that's a huge loss for Tennessee. I don't know, I think it's still kind of unclear at this point how serious of an injury it is, what the timetable looks like. Hamstring injuries, that can't be a serious one sometimes. So we'll just have to wait and see about that. But if he's out for an extended amount of time, that's a huge blow for Tennessee. I mean, he was probably their best pitcher from a year ago last year with the strikeouts and the run prevention and all. And so he had such a great start last week too, and his first appearance of the year. And so with kind of the starting pitching struggles out of a couple guys that's happened this past weekend, for him to go down like that, that's a big blow. And I kind of mentioned it earlier, but Tennessee, they have depth at the starting at pitching. I don't think they're going to be struggling to find a guy there. No one's going to pitch as well as Jackson Leaf, except maybe if they throw Sean Hunley in to start or someone else like that. But I think Vitello has options. I don't think a lot of them are going to be as good as Jackson Leaf has. But it definitely has been a big blow right now, depending on how serious this injury may or may not be.
Yeah, certainly. And Vitello just had a little bit post game. He didn't seem like he'd gotten fully briefed on it, but he thought maybe a week or two he'd be out. Just the way I've watched Vitello handle injuries the past few years, I would think we probably won't see him until right before SEC play, maybe a short appearance to get him reared up. And, we saw that with Garrett Crochet last year, that they were very cautious with him as he was dealing with a left shoulder injury. But, I mean, it's a really big loss, and he's a guy who can be he's probably Tennessee's most electric pitcher when it comes to his ability to strike guys out, and one of the best pitching prospects. It was funny at the game yesterday, there was about 20 scouts there that I'm assuming they were there to watch Leaf. And of course, Leaf goes down
out
two batters into the game, and they're just kind of sitting there stuck, watching the rest of the game. That was a little bit funny, but what's important about it is what we're going to get into next. And that's Tennessee's starting pitching has not been excellent to this point this year. We knew Tennessee, that was kind of a question mark. They had no one returning that had SEC experience starting. Chad Dallas has been, he's been the Friday starter, and he's been pretty solid so far this year. Blade Tidwell, a true freshman, all right, not quite as good as I think Tennessee expected him to be, but he hasn't been bad, and he's given Tennessee chances to win. And the fact that he's a true freshman, he's going to stay in that spot. They're going to keep riding with him. So the one guy that kind of seems like maybe the odd man out is Elijah Pleasance. He was all right in his first start at Georgia Southern, but really, really struggled on Saturday. Gave Tennessee just 2 innings, giving up 5 earned runs, walking 2 batters, and giving up 4 hits. And that's where losing Jackson Leaf, he's a guy that I kind of thought they would eventually move into the smart starting weekend spot. But without him, what do you do if you're Tennessee? Do you go to Sean Hunley? Do you give Elijah Pleasance another chance, another week, or do you look for other options on the roster?
I think they're gonna have to start out with giving Elijah Pleasance another chance. He's he's got some experience, being a junior, I think, and he wasn't too bad last weekend, but there against Indiana State, it really got roughed up. But they can't really afford to to have anybody else really except maybe Sean Hunley. So they're definitely gonna have to have Elijah Pleasant step up, and I think he's probably gonna have a short leash with that. Maybe 1 or 2 more weeks, and if he's not getting it done, then they're gonna have to turn to somebody else. But he's definitely going to be someone that Tennessee's going to have to rely on, just excuse me, to give them some solid starts. And Sean Hunley might be the guy that they turn to replace Jackson Leaf in some capacity. Like I said, he's been primarily out of the bullpen, but he did give him nearly 6 innings of work yesterday. So I think he's definitely got the ability to go for a long stretch of time. I think they'll maybe continue to stretch him out, and while Jackson Leaf is on the mend.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that Sean Hunley could be an effective weekend starter. For me, a guy like Hunley that's so comfortable in every position they've thrown him in the last 3 years. He's just so valuable in the bullpen. And for me, I think if I was Vitello, I would long term want to keep him there. Now, I don't think it's a bad idea to start him a couple weeks while you don't have Jackson Leaf. I'm like you, I'd probably give Pleasance another start this weekend. But if Pleasance struggles, I wouldn't be shy to give Hunley a weekend start because he can do it effectively. But I think Tennessee's pitching staff long term has the highest upside when you keep him with Redmond Walsh in the bullpen. That gives Tennessee 2 really consistent, really reliable arms that are just about as good as anyone you're going to see in the SEC out of the bullpen. But the other thing that makes it difficult, I would say, for Vitello is you look at those other options before the season of guys that could be weekend starters. Jason Rackers has just had 1 appearance. He started last week, one of the midweek games against Arkansas Pine Bluff. He's still not quite 100% from his Tommy John surgery last year. And then you have Camden Sewell, who didn't pitch much last year because he was injured, was really effective as a long reliever as a freshman. He's a guy that I thought really could fill that role and be an effective weekend starter. Through 2 appearances this year, he's struggled out of the bullpen with a 5.06 ERA. So it's certainly not as easy, not as clear for Vitello, but it will be interesting to see how he handles that both this week and going forward. And obviously, a lot of that will depend on the official diagnosis of Jackson Leaf and just how long he's going to be out.
Yeah, absolutely. You've listed off plenty of names. Vitello has options. They have depth, although just the general, lack of experience is a bit of an issue. Just the performances that have happened this year has been a bit of an issue from those guys. None of them are going to be quite as effective as Jackson Leaf is. They're not going to bring the same amount of strikeouts, the same stuff, but as Tennessee doesn't have a whole lot of options right now anyway, so they're gonna be looking to some of those guys for some innings. But like you said, it'll be definitely interesting to see what Vitello does, and it'll all depend on just how bad Jackson Lee's injury is.
Yeah, certainly. And on our way out of this first segment, Tennessee has a midweek game with a 1-5 Dayton team before facing Georgia State this weekend. What are you watching for Tennessee to be well at, kind of improve at this weekend, and what do you know about Georgia State and Dayton?
Yeah, well, we're watching for some of these same things we've been talking about. Is that the offense from a couple of their contributors, some of their older guys, they're gonna have to step up, particularly in the weekend series. You mentioned Georgia State beat Vanderbilt, so you know what they're capable of. They're a solid team. I think they do have a losing record, but they're a solid team right now. So definitely capable of upsetting Tennessee if they don't come out and play this weekend. So the offense is going to have to pick up whoever starts this weekend. Outside of Dallas and Blade Tidwell, they're going to have some. They're going to have to give some Tennessee some quality innings. Like I said, I'm not too worried about this week. Dayton's not really a good team. I still think Tennessee will probably go 3-1 or 4-0, maybe if I had to guess. But the offense is going to have to pick up from those couple of guys that have been slumping here to start the year.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see if Vitello mixes up the lineup a little more. He did that a lot the first weekend, but was pretty consistent with who he had out there the second weekend, especially in the outfield. Had Evan Russell in left, Drew Gilbert in center, and Jordan Beck in right all those games. You've seen Kyle Booker play well when he's given opportunities this year. You've seen Christian Scott be a pretty reliable fielder and bat. So I wonder if he mixes that up. And then on the pitching staff, I think the biggest thing I'd be looking for is see if Blade Tidwell can really put together a full good start. Obviously, he was pitching in the rain on Saturday. I'm sure he had never played in conditions like that. Tennessee can play in a lot worse weather conditions than any high school can due to the turf field. So, like I said, he's been solid, 8 innings. I think he's just given up 2 earned runs, but can he be a little more put it all together, be a little bit more efficient, be a little bit more sharp? I think will be worth watching this weekend when he starts against Georgia State. But that will do it for this first segment of the Checkerboard Chat. We will be back in segment 2 to talk about the Tennessee softball team, who's also off to a strong start this season. Welcome into the second segment of this Checkerboard Chat. I'm joined now by Andrew Peters, our UT Daily Beacon softball beat writer. Andrew, it's been a pretty good start to the season for Tennessee. The Lady Vols are up to a 12-1 start and probably had their best weekend of the season this past weekend, dominating in the Tennessee Invitational, outscoring their opponents 30-1. What have been your biggest takeaways from the strong start to the season?
Yeah, they're just they're a really great all-around team. They don't lack in many areas, and the areas that they do, or if they're lacking in one area during the game, there's usually someone who can make up for it, either on the offensive side or defensive side. So if it's not a great pitching game or a great defensive game, the offense is able to make up for it, and vice versa. So really, just they have a consistent and well-rounded team.
Yeah, well-rounded certainly seems to be the case so far. And on the hitting end, where Tennessee has been a little more inconsistent in past years, they've been really, really strong to start this season. Six starters hitting over 300, 2 hitting over 400. I think there's 8 total players in the team hitting over 300. Just what have you seen from the Lady Vols lineup so far this season, and how sustainable is that play once they start playing better teams in SEC play?
Yeah, I mean, they're a great hitting team. I don't think it's realistic for them to keep up that having that many hitters hitting at that level. But I do think that they can continue a pretty high level of hitting. I think those numbers, we'll see them drop a little bit once they start getting into some challenging play in the SEC and start seeing some tougher pitchers. But I do think overall they're a great hitting team. And that's just one area where I think they're going to excel this year.
Yeah, what stands out to me about the hitting is it's not just that people are getting on base, but there's a lot of power in the lineup. Four girls with 4 home runs, one with 6, one with 3. All those players have 3 or more or extra base hits on top of home runs. So it's not just that, they're taking advantage of bad fielding or bad opponents, which that's obviously part of it. But they definitely have talent on both contact and power. And going over to the pitching, Ashley Rogers missed all of the shortened 2020 season due to injury, but she is back and has been great so far this season. What have you seen from her, and how much does that do for Tennessee's upside? How effective she's been this year in a sport that you can really ride one pitcher a long way.
Yeah, Rogers having a great season. She obviously missed, I think, like something crazy like 600 days due to injury and then the shortened season. So I think the main thing is she's just excited to be out there again. And I think that's kind of motivated her to just take her play to the next level and play as hard as she can each game. I think she's also proving to be in the conversation with some of those like all-time Lady Vol pitchers. She joined Elite Company on Sunday, joining the top 10 on the Lady Vols single game strikeout record. So I think kind of getting into that conversation with some of those former pitchers is huge for her, and I think that's somewhere she wants to be. And then in terms of just her play, I think she really takes the team from a good team to a great team. If we didn't have Rogers, I think they would still play at a really high level. But I think she's just a leader, and she just motivates her team to want to be better. So
Yeah, you talk about those Lady Vols greats. Some of those real deep runs Tennessee's made in the postseason under Monica Abbott. You wonder if they can recreate some of that. Rogers I don't think is quite as decorated as Abbott is, but still a very high level player, no doubt about that. Not the only Tennessee pitcher that's seen playing time so far this season. Samantha Bender's had 3 appearances, and then Callie Turner and Bailey McCarron have also seen 4 appearances. What have you seen out of them, and where do you think they kind of stack up in terms of who could be seeing the most innings behind Rogers?
yeah, I think they're all going to see a lot of innings this season. Obviously, Sam Bender had the great game on Sunday, the no hitter. So I think we're going to see a lot of innings from her in that relief role. But I think they're all capable of stepping up and closing out games that they need to. And they've all proven that they can just be in that position to close out a game and to get some strikeouts. But I think Sam Bender is definitely going to be the Lady Vols' go-to behind Ashley Rogers.
Certainly should be interesting to watch going forward. Tennessee has one more week of non-conference play, even though they will get a matchup with Texas A&M in the weekend tournament in College Station before they start their full SEC play the week after that against LSU. What's the biggest concern? What's the biggest question mark thing this team needs to try to address going into SEC play?
Yeah, so I think the biggest question is just, can they keep this high level of play against these tougher SEC teams? In softball, you're gonna see new pitchers every night and just different teams every night, and you have to make adjustments quick and you have to be consistent. That's kind of the main thing that Coach Wiggly's talked about with the team, just being consistent in hitting and in pitching, and that's kind of what you have to do if you want to keep this level of play against SEC teams and further on into the postseason. So,
yeah, it certainly should be interesting to watch. Is, like I said, a very strong 12-1 start for Tennessee, but no games against anyone, any Power 5 opponents, and certainly the SEC in college softball is as good as it gets in any sport, in any conference, in any sport. So will be interesting the rest of the way, as the Lady Vols still have one weekend to go, one tournament in College Station before they start SEC play next weekend against LSU. That will do it for this segment of the Checkerboard Chat. We will be back in just a second to talk about a little bit of Tennessee volleyball. Welcome back for part 3 of this special edition of the Checkerboard Chat. I'm going to talk a little bit of Tennessee volleyball. I'm joined now in this segment by our UT Daily Beacon volleyball beat writer, Ethan Stone. Ethan, appreciate you being here with me. The Vols went 4-4 in the fall season, and they've kind of continued the same theme here to start the spring season 2-2. They win 2 games at Missouri before losing 2 against Florida at home. What were your kind of takeaways from the first 2 weekends of play for Tennessee?
So right off the bat, Tennessee played some really difficult opponents to start the spring season. It was pretty brutal, honestly. They have number 16, Missouri, to start. They handled that well. They beat them pretty convincingly both times. I think the second one was a sweep. And then, of course, they had to go to Florida, number 8 team in the country, best team in the SEC apart from Kentucky. Couldn't get it done there. The main takeaway I have is just that the team refuses to really give in, to let up when they're down and when they're ahead. And something that stood out is set 2, I believe it was, against Florida in game 1. They were down 8-2 early in the set. They came back, they took the lead actually, and then they went back down 24-20. And obviously you just need one more point to take the set. And they came back from that too. They're good against opposition. And yeah, that's really my main takeaway.
Yeah, it seems like, even though they're just 2-2, you mentioned 2 really good opponents. Even the Florida game, they played most of the sets pretty close. How do you compare this team kind of early in the spring season to what they were able to do in the fall season? Obviously, 500 records for both, but it kind of does seem like they're playing a little bit better right now.
Yeah, I think it's especially, it speaks well to them, especially because they're playing, in my opinion, they're playing better opponents. I mean, we've only played 4 games this far, but like I said, both of them have been against ranked teams. And even though they lost to Florida, they're playing well against these teams. While earlier in the fall season, the only real competition they had was Kentucky. Um, that was the first game of the season. They had to warm up against top 5 team in the country, not just in the SEC. So I think it speaks a lot to them that they could come out this spring season and really compete both games.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a point I agree with. I mean, you just look at the fall, a lot of inconsistencies. I mean, it's hard to say they weren't inconsistent when you get swept in the 2 games against Florida, but Florida being a top 10 team, they were in both those all 3 sets. It seemed like in both games, maybe a couple they weren't. But going forward, what's an area you feel like Tennessee needs to improve? Maybe realistically can kind of make some steps forward.
So my first couple games, I went to the Missouri one to start off, and the thing I noticed right off the bat, offensively and really defensively too, this team is very solid. They get a lot of blocks. Lily Feltz is phenomenal on the offensive end. She really has an ability to take over the game. I feel like really the one place they need some work on is just getting out of their own way at times. Against Florida, they went kind of going back to earlier, they took that lead after being down 24-20. They eventually gave up that set because they had a couple errors, just in the late game. You can't really do that against a really good team like Florida. And, similarly against Missouri, they had in both matches, they actually had more errors than Missouri, but they still found a way to get the win. So just kind of cleaning up those errors going into March, into the rest of the spring season.
Yeah, you talked about Lily Phelps. She's been a big part of Tennessee's team the past few years, but specifically this season, it seems like she's taken it up an extra notch. Been Tennessee's go-to player offensively. What have you seen from her?
Yeah, so like you said, she's the go-to player for Tennessee. She really has the ability to take over a game. So far through 12 games, she's averaging a double-double. She averages exactly 10 digs a game, somewhere near about 12 kills a game. Um, and I sound like a broken record, but she really does just have the ability to take over a game. Against Florida, when the Vols were down, you could tell that the sets were being thrown her way. I mean, she's like the point guard of basketball. She's like the quarterback. She's the one that leads the team when they're kind of down, when they really need a point.
Yeah, certainly, and she's a big part of this Tennessee team, and another year as well should be a big part again next year for Eve Rackham's team. Good to have a player like that coming back. Now, kind of moving forward, Tennessee has a couple more, I think 4 scheduled series left this spring season, this weekend at home again against Mississippi State. What do you know about the Bulldogs?
So they're not on the level of probably, to the relief of the volleyball team, they're not on the level of Florida and Missouri. So they're probably the one of the more tame opponents the Lady Vols are going to play to start out the spring season. They're 4-10 on the year. They just came off 2 losses at Alabama. But kind of like Tennessee, they've always been competitive in their losses. They've only been swept 3 times, 2 of those coming to Kentucky, who, like I said earlier, is a top 5 team in the country. Their star player is Gabby Waden. She's a junior. She has more kills than anybody on Tennessee as of right now. Their main problem really is they have a lack of like a second offensive threat. There are times that Waden literally carries the team.
Yeah, that should be an interesting challenge for Tennessee this weekend. Consistency always such a big question in all of college sports, especially teams that are kind of middling in the conference like Tennessee. Can they continue the strong play they have had so far this spring? Will be something worth following. We'll have full coverage this weekend at utdailybeacon.com. One last thing on the way out here, Tennessee volleyball missed 2 series, one due to COVID at the start of the spring season early in February at A&M, and then the winter weather canceled the weekend series at Ole Miss 2 weeks ago. Have you heard anything about that? Is there any chances that those games get made up at any point this spring?
So I know that there's a week. I'm not exactly just off the top of my head sure which week it is. I believe it's the 25th, 26th, the week of the 25th, 26th, there's supposed to be a week that's, set aside just in case that happened with the COVID year, obviously. And so there's a pretty high likelihood that one of those two series will be rescheduled to that point. I haven't heard anything, just from Eve or for the SID on if those will for sure be rescheduled, but hopefully we can get some of those missed series in.
Will be interesting to follow as Tennessee looks to get on the right side of 500 this weekend against Mississippi State, and then finish strong in the spring season. 4 more weekend series, 8 games scheduled, and then, as we were just saying, a chance for at least hopefully one more series to get made up. We will have complete coverage of that, all that this season on utdailybeacon.com. Ethan, appreciate you joining me for this segment. We'll be back with a little bit more Tennessee sports here in just a sec. Welcome back to the 4th and final edition of the Checkerboard Chat. We're going to talk a little bit of Tennessee soccer now. The Vols went 4-3-1 on the fall season, earning an SEC East championship before falling in the first round of the SEC tournament. Now, in the spring season, off to a 3-0 start, I'm joined by our UT Daily Beacon soccer beat writer, Tommy Janikowski. Tommy, what's been your takeaways from the first 3 weeks of Tennessee's spring season?
It starts at the back for the Tennessee. It starts with Lindsay Romig and Tara Katz and Ren French. Lindsay Romig in goal is an all-SEC performer. She's really outstanding at communicating and controlling the defense. And Ren French and Tara Katz are integral parts to the defense as they just really solidify this team at the back and help give up not a lot of goals in the fall and the spring.
Yeah, that's certainly been the most consistent thing of Brian Pinsky's teams over the past 2 years. Always really good on the defensive end and in the back end. They've had some struggles the past year or so on the offensive end, but that's been elevated a little bit this spring by the play of freshman Jada Thomas. She had 3 goals in the fall, that's certainly one of the better players, offensive players on the team, but now 7 goals through 3 games. What has she been able to do to raise her level of play, and just how much does that change Tennessee's team?
Jada's been outstanding. She's always moving forward. She's always possessing the ball and helping her teammates. A lot of these goals are a case of, the right place at the right time. She's been at the doorstep of the goal, cleaning up rebounds. Another thing that's really helped Jada is Mackenzie George and Abby Burdett. Abby played a lot of defense in the fall rather. And spring, she's moved back to her natural position of forward where she played in high school. And her and Mackenzie George have really helped Jada spark the offense altogether. Jada's really scored most of the goals, but she'll tell you in her interviews that, it's a team effort, and Mackenzie and Abby Burdett are definitely helping her out with those goals.
Yeah, and it's certainly been really a 180 for this Tennessee team on offense. In the fall, really struggled with just 11 goals. I think they only had 2 games. They scored more than 1 goal. Now, 11 goals in 3 games. Now, granted, Appalachian State and Gardner-Webb aren't the best. Xavier does have a good team. They were able to score 3 in that one. Do you think that's just a product of weaker competition, or do you think as they start to play some bigger schools here in the end of the season that they can continue to have better, more improved offense?
Easier competition definitely helps. It's hard to blow out an SEC opponent, 7-0, and that's all they faced in the fall season was SEC. Just under half their games in the fall were against ranked opponents. 2 of them were against Vandy, who's now ranked 6th in the coaches poll. So that was a big part of it. But the addition of Abby Burdett has really sparked this offense. She's really played some of those incisive balls to Mackenzie George and Jada, and they've been able to, put shots on goal, clean up rebounds, and ultimately put the ball in the net. But it's also the defense. The defense has won 50-50 balls and held possession outstanding across the back line. And it's really helped the team all around.
Yeah, certainly should be interesting to watch, see if they can, or how much they can continue this success. I don't think anyone expects it to continue at the same rate. A little bit different year in college soccer. We're talking about it in March, which makes it different, but all the SEC play happens in the fall, non-conference happens in the spring, and then there is going to be an NCAA tournament. Talk a little bit about how that's going to be set up and what you see the the Vols outlook looking like here about a month or so away.
Well, usually there's 64 teams, much like the men's basketball. But this year they've cut it down to just a 48 team bracket. There'll be 31 automatic qualifiers with 17 at-large selections. So if the Lady Vols can't win the SEC tournament this year, they'll be looking for an at-large selection, one of those 17.
Certainly should be interesting to watch. As like you were saying earlier, SEC really good conference, far from the expectation being Tennessee to win it. So, I feel like the resume Tennessee's put together in a normal year probably would be good enough to get them in. This year, I don't know. It's probably going to be on the bubble, so that's going to make it interesting as they close the year. They have 4 more games and chances to earn some marquee wins. They start with Wake Forest this weekend, and they also get North Carolina, Cincinnati, and Louisville. All 4 of those teams are pretty solid. North Carolina is one of the best teams in the country. But just starting this weekend with Wake Forest, what does Tennessee need to do to kind of start continuing to play at high level as they go against some really strong opponents in the regular season?
It starts with possession. A lot of the fall season they were chasing the ball a little bit, and this year they've been able to possess the ball outstandingly, and it's really helped move the offense. If they can continue to get good midfield play from newcomers like Hannah Tillett, they'll be able to really spark this offense. And if Abby, Mackenzie, and Jada can continue to be that offensive threat that they've been this whole spring season, then there's no telling where this Lady Vols team could go.
Certainly should be interesting to watch as Tennessee takes on Wake Forest Saturday night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll have complete coverage of that and all other sports that we talked about here, all their action this week at utdailybeacon.com. Thank you for joining us this edition of Checkerboard Chat. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.